I'm going to start with a review of what we did last week, just to see how we can connect all of these different things. And my voice, by the way, has a little bit of an allergic reaction to something. And yeah, no, it's some stuff in the air. Anyway, last week we started with trying to explain a little bit of what Temunah was, which is a Hebrew word that is used in the Torah for image. And it's also one of the chapters in Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, which turns out to be very interesting and related to this. The word Temunah comes up in the Torah in about 5 or 6 places. One of the key places that it comes up is it comes up in Bamidbar, which we talked about last week, but we didn't talk about in any real depth. And we're not going to talk about it in depth, but I just want to mention that in Bamidbar, Miriam and Aaron and Moses are sort of hanging around, and Moses, Miriam and Aaron are upset with Moses, and the Lord says to Miriam and Aaron, you have no status in this discussion because Moses sees my Temunah. Moses sees my image. Moses knows my image, okay? So image becomes a very important thing. In the process of our trying to get to know the divine, this is a bit of a clue. In other words, what is the Temunah? What is the Temunah? How can we get to know this sort of thing? Maimonides pointed out in the chapter that we read of Maimonides, which was chapter 3, book 1, that Temunah is not, first of all, he's telling us there are 3 possibilities for Temunah. The first one, it is not. So Temunah is not an object seen by the senses outside of us. Temunah is not an object inside of us rendered by the imagination. Temunah for Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed is, I'm not even going to say an object, but it's an intellectual perception. So this thing we're looking for is an intellectual perception. And the intellectual perception part is a very strange thing. And we had some discussion of what were intellectual perceptions. And some people had some notions about this. But for Maimonides, the intellect, our intellect, whatever our intellect is the vehicle to get close to the divine. Okay, it's through the intellect that we get close to the divine. I'm going to give you a clue about the intellect. And the intellect has something to do with the notion of self-reference. Okay, self-reference is going to have a big part to play in the intellect. And therefore, we're going to have our new reading of this week, which is from de Salzman. And de Salzman was a woman. She was sort of an acolyte of Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff was a great teacher who was around. He died in the 1950s. He had lots of followers. He had people in Paris. He had people in Russia. In any case, he was on to something, this Gurdjieff. I've read a lot of his stuff, and I think he's sort of a top-notch thinker. Not a religious person per se, but the kind of thing that he's talking about should interest us a lot. Anyway, de Salzman writes this essay, and Charles Shapira has volunteered today to give us the first
silly boy
to give us the first crack at this essay. Okay, Charles, take a shot.
All right. So I recall you saying that what you thought was the best approach was for me to let people know the things that I think that I know from reading this selection, and then also the things that I don't know, and that should generate the questions for discussion. So I will say, to start out with, one of the things that I don't know is philosophy. I have never spent a lot of time studying it. So realizing that this is, I can do it. I can do it. You know. And the only reason I say that as a preface is that I realize that there are a lot of probably recognizable philosophical tropes within this selection that might mean something very specific that I don't necessarily recognize. Right. So,
well, I would take it just in a common sense way, if you can. Forget about the philosophy.
I have to.
Okay.
So that's my disclaimer, is that I have to do it that way because I don't have a basis for doing it otherwise. What do I know from this reading? I know that there's a distinction made between, if you will, our natural mode of thinking, which might be the socialized way of thinking that we grow up in society, we learn the mores, we learn the rules, we know what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and so we exist to a great extent within that framework. And that what else I know from this reading is that de Salzman is saying that we have to transcend that frame of reference in order to be able to do something important or significant. So I think back to when I was in high school and college and studying physics, and the all-important discussion of the frame of reference. Everything is dependent on the particular frame of reference that you are using to decide how things will appear to you or to somebody else who's within the frame of reference. And so I think that seems like a very apt analogy to what de Salzman is suggesting. There are a bunch of statements that are, they're very direct. That we have to transcend ourselves. That's the power to look down upon ourselves and to sort of see ourselves as I find myself in 59 forgetting a lot of words periodically. Authentically, to see ourselves authentically, the real I, right, as opposed to the person who is part of the we, right? So, and it says that if we're not able to do that, that we don't have either objectivity or intentional action. So, again, anything that we do that's within the constraints and the structure of society, somebody else and some other force through the accumulated course of time has sort of made those decisions for us about how we're going to act, how we're going to respond to things, what we're going to value, what we're not going to value. Things that I think I don't know because of these statements. There's a very clear connection between what is referred to as something that's transcendent versus something that is ordinary, right? Ordinary action, ordinary thought, the passivity of my ordinary thought, she says, towards the end of the article. And that seems to me to be, to bear a very strong relationship between what we call secular and sacred in Judaism, the idea of kiddush or kadosh, and how we make Shabbat something completely different and separate so that it doesn't bear resemblance to the rest of the week, right? So one being ordinary, one being transcendent in some kind. And in Judaism, that is designed to move us closer to the abode, to the dwelling, right? To the that image that we've been using. But at the same time, there's a lot of questions that I have, and that is that I'm not sure I can completely reconcile this notion of having to be outside of the system in order to do anything that's truly transformative. It can be argued that if you're not in the system, you don't even know what to transform. Potential. And then also this notion of sort of an unattached or disinterested ability to observe things. I find myself thinking, well, somebody who knows more about philosophy, just its logic, etc., would be able to say something about the value of that kind of observation that's disconnected, right? Because she does talk about, I can't really see me, I can't figure out what I am unless I'm outside. And yet we do often find our best good role within the structures that we live in, as in somebody who takes a calling to be a doctor, a rabbi, a priest, a politician with good intentions. So they're working within the system, and they actually can do something that's transformative. So I have a hard time finding where the distinction and the dividing line comes between what you can do within the system and what you can do without.
Let me stop you for a second. The push here is the notion of I am, okay?
Yes.
And the what associated with I am. So I am a doctor, I am a lawyer, I am tall, I am skinny, I'm cool, I'm a card player, etc. Those are all sort of attributes or things that are attached to the I, the I part. The I part, okay? And one of my favorite philosophers, the guy Sartre, used to say, I am what I am not, or I am not what I am. Okay, so all of these am things are attached now. So the impetus in Gurdjieff and a lot of other kind of schools is to try to get to the I part. And how do you get to the I part? So it isn't.
I do see that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's four circular references in this article, and what they're talking about is the self-reference issue.
Yeah.
So keep going. Sorry.
No, absolutely. So kind of circling back to that notion of my struggling with what you can do within the system and without, right? In terms of even knowing yourself. I mean, there's some phrases, right? Without the effort of rising outside of yourself, thought falls back into a sleep filled with words, images, primitive notions, etc. We also have these stories of people who fall asleep and dream in order to receive revelation from an outside. So and those are people who then realize that they might be different and outside of the system. So it's
people say this is above my head.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when they're saying this is above my head, what they're saying is there's a certain realization that I have that this thing that we're talking about is above my head. I don't understand it. So it seems to me to be outside of my scope of understanding. And Charles, you put that in a really nice way when you're talking about the structure of understanding and how it's referential, of how it's in a frame of reference. And people say, well, why don't you think outside the box?
Yeah.
I say, why don't you think outside the cube? It's a cube box, anyway, but a cube is a box. Anyway, so the is that possible? Now, why people try and reach they try and reach this I. And they try and reach this I using various methods, meditation, etc. And once they get to the I, I want to read you an experience.
And when you're done, I just want to make.
Go ahead. Make the
more quick.
And I wanted to make a comment about the system when you finish, sir, about the Black Panthers working within the system. My mother told me their idea, the Black Panthers, was to work within the system. They were not trying to just overthrow America or anything. I just wanted to add that. And
thank you.
My name's Yvette Washington.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Charles. So there's two other just statements that I would like to learn more about. So she says at the end of one paragraph, without this inner look, I can only fall back into automatism under the law of accident, which begs the question, if is society then being claimed to be accidental, and there's no governing flow to it. Okay, so but it also says that this look makes me both responsible and free. So that's rising above and finding your true I. It makes you responsible and free. It does say I reach a state where I am known, but it begs the question, if you are not able to rise above and look critically at yourself and find the actual I, does that make you unresponsible for anything within society? Which is an interesting, I mean, that's something that has come up many times, especially with war.
She claims that then you're captive. And
absolutely.
That's what she.
But see, we don't for most of us, we don't allow that distinction to say, oh, you were just a soldier, you were just a peon, you were just a pawn in the machine. No, you bear individual responsibility, whether you are aware of it or not, whether you realize it. So any case. And then the very last question I have is with regards to the very last statement. And so the second to last statement, it is in my essence that I may be reunited with the one who sees.
Oh, wrong thing.
Deity. And then it says, there I would be at the source of something unique and stable, at the source of that which does not change. And so, it feels to me, in my, level of mediocre education. No, it's okay, because I'm just acknowledging what I know to be true. And that is that there's lots of our tradition that I have not studied. I have not spent time studying Talmud. I have not spent time reading through a lot of the Talmud. But the Bible, the Torah, the first part of the canon, I feel that we frequently are talking about the evolution of God's relationship with the Jewish people, right? We have the story of Noah, and we have the destruction with the flood, and we have God being chastised, and God saying, you're right, I won't do that again. I might do something else, but I won't do that again. And that actually happens a few times. Sodom and Gomorrah, we have a human, a creation of God, but so some kind of an offshoot of God, right? As we talked about last week, who is chastising the creator and saying, this cannot be the way you actually intend things to be. And so we have the argument of Abraham with God about how many people are righteous enough to save a society, leading to the 10 that we use for the minyan. So I don't understand. I know that there must be a good way to understand this, but to find something unique and stable at the source of that which does not change, I don't know where that exists in existence.
Well, that's what these people are looking for. That's perhaps.
But I don't know where that exists.
Well,
that idea of something that does
we're
not.
The ones that have to do. We have to be doing the change.
Okay. So the idea.
No, I mean in Tanakh, the source changes because we change God. There's a two-way, right? And Martin Buber says thou.
Yeah, Martin Buber also realizes that there is a relationship with the divine when the divine and us are somehow locked together. It's
Yeah.
somehow locking
Yeah.
together. Right.
So anyway, I hope I did an adequate job.
Oh,
of
you did
presenting
that.
this.
Very nice, very nice. The notion that God changes, and that the change in God can be initiated by us is really a powerful notion. But the notion, now to look at this sort of historically, Aristotle had God not changing at all. He called it God the unmoved mover. Okay,
But that's essentially what.
that's what they're trying to get to. But
That's
now what,
Granger's immovable
okay,
no.
now what does this have to do with the Temunah?
For me,
Yeah.
The connection that I can make is that in my mind is that what's being asked of us by the Salzman is to critically engage with existence. So if we are passive, if we are just reactionary, and just doing what is expected of us, then we are not going to be transcendent in the sense of the word, in terms of who we are, and then it's very limiting potentially to what contributions that we can make to society. So that's one thing. The notion of Noah as being the most righteous in a very unrighteous time. So Noah might have been transcendent on some level, but it was marginally transcendent because the times didn't allow for it to be perhaps more transcendent. And so we have Noah failing on many levels, even when he succeeds, right? So the notion of trying to find that which is true, and this would be the notion of study that will lead you closer to God, to Adonai. You can't just feel it. You can't just wake up and say, sure, I understand how this works. You have to, as de Salzman says, you have to rise above yourself in order to be able to critically view, observe, potentially analyze, and then potentially change what it is that's around you and that you exist within. So that, to me, is another way of stating the analogy that was presented last week about trying to find the doorway in and then find the inner sanctum. And then once you reach the inner sanctum, to find some kind of communion with the deity, right?
Right, but you see, the point they're making is that the doorway in is the I. That's what they're saying. Okay, they're saying that the exploration of your agency, of where your agency is coming from, of your agency stripped of the ego and your personality. So in this particular school, which I think is a very interesting school, the chief there, Gurdjieff, was a real interesting, odd guy. And he made people feel uncomfortable in various ways. And the discomfort had to do with stripping off the things that they were attached to, that they were thinking was themselves. Okay. So he was like a group psychologist or group psychiatrist who was working and once these people felt their personality come loose, then they could appreciate this I thing. Now, this I thing, when you get to the I thing is sort of a mysterious thing, right? And you've already said that it's outside of the frame of reference. The I thing, our eyes are outside of the frame of reference that we walk around with all the time. So how do we talk about it? Can we say?
Oh, excuse me. Before that, the concept Temunah is new to me. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Excuse me, the word is new to me, but I'm so glad I'm Judeo-Christian because I have an intellectual what was the word, image of God, but I wouldn't be able to draw it or anything like that. And I just wanted to add that, yes. Is that word Temunah?
Yeah. Well, you're very close to that, because what we're talking about is an intellectual thing that is not an image. Okay, it's not an image. It's
Right.
something that isn't an image. It's something that's a very strange thing. Now, the reason we have trouble with this is when we go ahead and try and describe this thing.
See,
Where
I
are
don't try to describe it. I just
no,
have
you
an
don't. No,
intellectual
I know.
knowing.
Right. But when you go ahead and try and talk about it, it's to say anything about it, you end up drawing from the box that you're in to be able to describe it. So here I am, I'm sort of a space traveler, and I open this door and I'm outside, and I feel this presence of something, this wonderful presence or frightening presence of something, and then I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to describe it to myself. Where does my language come from? Because I'm outside of myself. I'm outside of my descriptive possibilities in the
Like Lao
process.
Tzu said, I read that when I was a teenager. Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching said, those who know do not talk. Those
That's
who talk do not know. And that's
that's
been
right.
something that
Actually, yeah,
I, yes, I learned by reading that on my own, the Tao Te Ching, when I was a teenager.
yeah, that's good, and that's sort of the path that we're on here. So the path that we're on here is to get contact with our true I, because it turns out, and I have more evidence for this as the class goes on, that this I that we're going to get in contact with has some connection or some sort of something to do with Adonai, with the God that we're looking for. And Charles, and you, to really get this, you have to feel a little bit of this, okay? So you feel a little bit of this, it makes you perplexed, it makes you wonder. You know, the questioning of your own I, the looking backwards to see who is it, like, for example, if I'm going to question my own I, I'm trying to think of who is this being that's talking right now, you know, and so I'm always turning backwards fast in thought to try and catch myself in action. Very difficult thing to do. And when I do that, little by little, I open this kind of a door. Now listen to what this, by the way, is a very short passage from another Gurdjieff student. And this is a Gurdjieff student that actually used to sit in meditation classes with the woman that we just read. Okay, her name is Anne-Marie Delane Cambacedes. Anyway, she says, after that, to sense the talk. Now, here's a very physical experience that I think is important, because this is not an unusual physical experience for people who are into this. After this, to sense the top of my head, so sensitive and so porous that an opening to another energy becomes possible. Something outside myself reconnects with something inside, which was always there, but I was not there to welcome it. A fleeting sensation of no longer being alone, no longer being separate, but reconnected to an immense presence that one can neither name nor represent to oneself, which is, you would not be seeking me if you had not found me. And the present says to you, it says to her, you would not be seeking me if you had not found me. That's a very interesting thing. Who's got a clue as to what that means? You would not be seeking me if you hadn't already found me.
I think most people that I know, they're not seeking God. They have God. You know what I'm saying? They're not questioning or seeking, but maybe someone else is doing some seeking. I've heard of people who were maybe and their particular family's religion tormented or beaten and stuff. And then they are trying to figure out, well, how can I believe in this God if my parents were beating me and making me read something all the time? Maybe it's the Bible, whatever it is. I was that's what I was thinking. But I'm not seeking, I'm
No,
not
no,
seeking.
hang on. You may be coming from a different tradition, okay? And
Judeo-Christian,
there
yes,
are
Judeo-Christian,
there
Catholic.
are traditions. There are traditions where people just feel this, and the questions sort of disappear. Okay, there's no issue of getting close to this thing because they already are close to this thing. But in the Western tradition, in the Jewish tradition, most people do not feel these things just off the bat. So they use different methods to be able to feel this connection to the divine. One of them is study. The other is meditation. People use drugs from time to time. They listen to music, beautiful music. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Fauré, all of that wonderful, wonderful music. When you let yourself listen to that music and be enveloped by that music, you're there. I mean, it certainly takes you there. Anyway, what about that statement?
About that seeking, so if there is some beginning of an awareness that you have found this, then naturally, maybe that's not the right word, but then you would want to seek more, to know more about it.
You get hungry for the
That's
experience.
right, yeah.
Because as the article said, it's there.
It's there.
It's always there. But you have to turn the switch on inside yourself in order to find that. Yeah.
So I mean, referring back to the Salzman and the idea of the frame of reference, I think there are many, perhaps most human beings have contact with a religion. They may participate or not participate on different levels, but nonetheless, they're aware that it's an element of their society. So that means that from society, they have some ideas, imagery, perhaps viewpoints, attitudes about what God is based on their community. So somebody who grows up in a Jewish community has one sort of set of guidelines, if you will. Somebody who's Catholic has a different set. Somebody who's evangelical Christian has a different view. Somebody who's Buddhist. So to your question, the getting to know is the part that happens after you have already acknowledged on some level or recognized on some level that God acts within our existence, right? Because that part has already been transmitted to you, whether you participate or believe or not. You know that concept is present and valued on some level within the society that you live in. So then everything that comes after that is the seeking after knowing on some level.
So you think
Powerful.
do you think the tradition is really important for individuals, that in other words, to get a clue that there is something like this thing called God? Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have religion and traditions as a young person, then there's nothing to rebel against and to think about.
I used to make that argument to one of my brothers. I had three younger brothers, but the youngest passed away a couple of years ago. But one of my brothers, he married a Jewish girl. It ended in divorce very quickly because he announced that he was no longer going to be a neurosurgeon, and she said, "Okay, I'm going to go find a neurosurgeon." And so and then he remarried this wonderful woman. She's an engineer, but she's non-practicing Catholic. She was born and raised in Ecuador. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman. And they don't really practice any of their religion at home. And they were in town, they were visiting. And my brother asked me, he said, do you think that I should put my kids into Hebrew school? supplemental Hebrew school like we do, a couple hours a week. And I said, I think you should, but maybe not for the reasons that you believe. But to your point, it is much better in life to have something to rebel against than to have nothing. It's a much better place to have a conviction that you either agree with or disagree with as a motivation and a way to get above yourself and look critically and find out actually who you are and what you are, than to have nothing and be floating and not know what to do, which opens you up then to being susceptible to all kinds of more extreme,
yes, like cults and things. And when you mentioned sir, you were mentioning a religious background. Well, my family has been Catholic for 5 generations. It started with my Irish grandmother, and I'm sure that has everything to do with the idea of how I have what was the word Tumu, the intellectual image of God, and also how I know God exists. Maybe if I hadn't been in any religion, perhaps maybe I wouldn't have an idea about God in terms of knowing God exists and all of that. And maybe some people who have never been in a religion have a idea about God. I really don't know. Maybe you all can tell me more about that.
Well, but the problem is when we say that God exists, we're saying something about God, and where are we situated that we can say such a thing? In the realm that we're talking about, in our transcendent realm, in the realm in which we've left we call the box that we live in, or the cube that we live in, the fourfold root of sufficient reason. Okay, that's what the philosophers call it, the cube that we live in. It's the fourfold root of sufficient reason. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a trip. We're going to tear a hole in the fourfold root of sufficient reason, or basically what we're going to do is we're going to look into ourselves, and that's the hole we're going to tear. Okay, so we're going to look into ourselves, tear a hole in the fourfold root of sufficient reason. We're going to go out there and we're going to have some ineffable experience. Ineffability.
And when I tear myself open, I'm going to see my Irish great grandmother looking at me. Her last name was Garner. And before we switch gears or anything, there was something from the discussion way back, and I just wanted to say that idea of your social consciousness, but you had a way of saying it, the other gentleman who was speaking. And I want to say that for me, it has been very difficult to give up the concept of capitalism. But I understand now from people who are younger than me, even 5 years younger than me, that has a bad reputation. But I think about Fortune 500 companies. I think about corporate America in the United States of America. And so when you were talking about coming out of that box, it has been difficult for me to just say, oh, capitalism. Oh, what a terrible thing.
Well, listen, we're not trying to make judgments about the cube that we live in. Okay, this is not a political science class. Okay, you got to understand this is nothing to do with political science. So we're not talking about the cube that we live in. We're not making any value judgments about it. At my age, I've kind of lost interest in that. So I'm interested in something else. Okay, so what I'm interested in is what can we say about getting out of the cube? What can we say when we're out of the cube? Can we say that God is an old man sitting on a chair? Can we say that God is this? Can we say even that God exists? Can we use exists versus non-exists? Well, it turns out if you really examine yourself carefully, you can't say anything. It's ineffable. Ineffable meaning that what you're going to experience, and then you try and put into words, or you try and put it into a concept, it's never going to fit, because out there, the language structure, that we learned in here doesn't work. Okay, it just doesn't work. So the notion of trying to talk about the divinity, I think, is a waste of time. Actually, the important thing is what we want to get close to the divinity and forget about talking about it. I mean, that may sound very strange because people are always talking about God. They're saying, well, God wants you to be a good person. You know, all of these kind of dictates that are part of the tradition, and that's fine. But, you know, if we're really sort of seeking this thing, we've got to be careful that we don't seek something that we made up in here and project to the outside and cover the thing that we're seeking with our preconceptions.
Well, we do talk about nurturing and finding and nurturing the divine spark within ourselves. So that's
fine.
And then also you have the notion, like in the evangelical church, of the church of one. Everybody is their own church with their own direct, right?
Own direct connection.
Direct connection to the divinity. So a lot of that aligns with sort of this notion of trying to find what that is and what your relationship to it is, as opposed to reading somebody else's description of what it is and saying you agree or disagree.
Right. So the divinity that you find is personal, and it's maybe a hope that other people share the same divinity, but it's just a hope.
But you don't need to talk about it, right?
No, you don't need to talk about it. You don't need to talk.
Better not to.
Better
Right,
not to.
yeah.
Yeah. Maimonides says when you get to the divinity, it's the middle of the night, and you keep your mouth shut because there's nobody to talk to in the middle of the night when you're 3/4 asleep.
Well, that's what I was thinking when I left last week, and again, it's like a dreamlike state.
Well, you know, the Jews thought that a dream like state was 1/64th of a prophecy. Okay. Now, why 1/64th? That's really sort of a crazy thing. But when you're in a dream-like state, you know, when you try, dreams are a partial opening of the box that we live in, right? In the middle of the night, when you have these dreams, it means that the fourfold root of sufficient reason, the cube that we live in, has got some cracks in it, and other things are coming in. And what's happening is that you're sort of rendering these other things or this other presence or whatever it is in terms of your day-to-day life. So you have these kind of
What's more valuable, I think, is a meditative state while you're awake. That would be a higher
sleep-like state.
Yeah.
Well, that is
but you're
get
yourself.
Yeah, meditation isn't sleep. Okay, meditation.
I'm saying that
No, that's why
that's a higher
my word
level.
to say sleep-like.
Well, meditation is rapt attention. I would say meditation is best described by an intense attention to something. Intense attention.
But when people wake and they've had strong dreams, they were rapidly involved.
Yeah,
with
they
those
were.
dreams.
They were.
Right.
They were.
So,
They were.
for whatever the connections were or not.
Okay, so the Temunah, getting back to the Temunah, the image of God. By the way, there's lots of Hebrew words that have to do with image of God, that Tselem and other words. Maimonides singles out Temunah, though, Temunah, and as he says, that's the only Hebrew word that, although it's used amphibously, which is a word I hadn't heard until I started to read.
I had to look it up myself.
Yeah.
Although it's used amphibously, one of the meanings of the word from his perspective is an intellectual apperception. Intellectual apperception. And this intellectual apperception is a route to getting close to the divine. Now, Moses had that, okay? And I think if Moses had it, we should all get on his bandwagon, obviously, because Moses knew what he was up to. So we should sort of follow Moses in this. Anyway, so we're looking for this intellectual apperception of the divine. And but the clue is, for example, the Gurdjieff, the guys who followed Gurdjieff were really into self-examination, self-remembering, self-reference. And as you spend a lot of time doing that, that's when you sort of spring a leak in yourself and you develop this transcendent piece, okay? It's like, you know, if you spend a lot of time, you know, what you do is you come to the wall of yourself or come to the wall of your eye and you got a chisel and you got and you're going ahead and you're going to crack it open. And what you do is you crack it open and you find this hole, or so to speak, in yourself, and you're in this transcendent place. So it's through, and it's through examination of your eye. Now we're going to pick up later on in a couple of talks, we're going to pick up Aya Asher Aya, which I think people have not dealt with that correctly. Anyway, so we're going to see if we can really get to what that means. And where God, that's a section in the Torah associated with the burning bush experience, which, by the way, is a personal experience. It's not a bush that's sitting out there in the world. It's not a bush that's on fire. Where do you think the bush is? The bush is here. Okay.
I saw it in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, I know. And these movies that show that are sending us in the wrong direction. Anyway, the bush is inside of us. The bush is inside.
As you walk through Oak Park too, there are these beautiful red. They remind me of the burning bush. I stand there and look at it, trying to.
They're called burning.
I know. I'm trying to get it.
Can somebody give me tell me what Torah or what I can go buy? I want to buy one. I know it's the Old Testament but in other traditions, but I want to go buy a Torah.
I would suggest you get the Chabad edition.
Okay.
Chabad. Look it up on the internet.
Yep.
And you can go through the whole thing. And probably you're going to need to read Hebrew to be able to get to the bottom of that too.
Oh, I'll just consult you all. I speak Korean. I am learning German, and I'm really great at Spanish. But no more languages for me right now. Maybe when I'm 90, I don't know.
Hebrew is very important for this thing.
So I wanted to just share very quickly, you know, as a musician, but since the orchestras that I had, they're gone. They don't exist anymore. And I don't play as often as I would like to. There's this experience that you have as a musician when you go back and you're trying to practice and you're trying to kind of get yourself into shape for whatever concert or the music festival that I have to go play in a couple of weeks. And you first start playing again and you say, oh, sounds pretty good, doing okay. And then as you keep going and as you start listening again, you start to realize how terrible you sound. and so it's an apt analogy because you are reactivating all of the skills and the reflexes that
you're remembering and you're reflecting on.
You're listening more critically.
Right.
So you're getting outside of yourself, and instead of, oh, I'm playing something nice, I love this tune, whatever it is, you start listening to yourself and you start realizing, oh man, you sound like crap. You got to work on air, you got to work on pitch, you got to work on this, your tempo is not, and then you get into that mode where now you're trying to fix everything and move yourself closer to that ideal.
Right. And that takes self-reference. That takes self-reference. That takes looking at oneself, looking at one's skills, and looking at it in a non-terribly critical way if you really want to improve it.
Can I jump in there and say, when I am, like, we're talking about God and all this and the Torah, the word CARP, that seems like a bad word to say while we're talking about God. Not to be telling people who to be or how to talk, but that that kind of like to say CARP, I don't want to say that word. We're talking about God. That's like a bad word when we're talking about God.
There's something fishy
Somebody
about
say that word.
Yeah, you got a problem with fish?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what a carp is, right?
Yes, yes.
CRAP, but
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, that's what
okay,
Yeah,
that's-
CRAP. I thought.
okay.
That's what I assumed. You
Yeah.
transposed.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that Charles is into I and Thou, Martin Buber's stuff.
I know of it. I know what he's talking about.
Have you read that carefully?
I've started thousands of books and never finished them.
Yeah.
That's my claim.
Well, but you got the whole point of the thing, honestly.
Yeah, right.
I think, anyway, in my opinion, you got the whole point of the thing. Okay, so next week, I'm going to be doing Zoom,
Okay.
so you can have
Okay.
people can be here. You don't have to change the thing.
Right.
So I'll be logging in on Zoom.
It'd be Norma and I.
Yeah, and I thought next week we would do a letter to a young poet by Rainey Marie Rilke. And the reason I'm choosing this is Rilke was a German, sort of really highly romantic poet, but he had a huge spiritual base to him, a huge spiritual connection to him. Anyway, when he's writing this letter, it's not long and it's not complicated, but when he's writing this letter, he's trying to help somebody who's trying to become a poet. Okay. And trying to become a poet isn't so far from what we're trying to do here right now. Okay. The skill set that's needed to become a poet has to do with opening up your spiritual side. It has to do with opening up of getting into yourself in the way that we're talking about. Anyway, so this is an interesting thing. And anybody want to take this on? Norma, you want to read that
Deposition.
The 2 points he's making? He's talking about solitude,
Okay.
and he's talking about courage.
I would like to take, when you say take it on, you mean prepare for the next meeting? I would like to do that.
Are you a member of the synagogue?
I filled out my application to become a member. I filled it out online.
Well, you won't be able to do that unless you're a member of the synagogue. I'm sorry, but you can certainly attend, and your contribution.
Oh, I thought you meant next week. This meeting.
Next week.
This meeting. Okay.
This meeting next week. Yeah. Do you want to try that?
So I have about a half a dozen contractors at the building next Thursday, figuring out hopefully the last bit of the bugaboo with the new HVAC system and also with the sounds that's been gotten. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to guarantee that I'm going to be able to spend a lot of time on the session next week. So probably somebody else should prepare it.
What about Charles or Morris? Are you interested in doing letters to a young poet? I'll send you the thing immediately and you can take a look at it. And if you don't want to do it, one of you volunteer for that? Charles, you want to volunteer?
I'm not going to be available next week. Thank you for your consideration, but I'm going to be on a road trip.
Okay.
We're going on our annual pilgrimage to the Cumberland Mountains, and this week, next time, I'll be on the road. So I unfortunately will miss it. But on another occasion, yes, I'd be happy to try and participate, although it would come from my frame of reference as an engineer. But
what about Morris? Are you interested?
I'm interested, but I guess the only caveat I have is that I think I need to be I don't know if I need to be in this meeting with Charles to talk about this air conditioning.
The air conditioning.
Since he's
Listen.
he's the VP of the building.
Listen,
Maybe you'll do it.
these are real practical things that one has to solve
Send it out.
before one has the leisure time to poke
Send
a
it
hole
out.
in yourself.
Take a
We
look
probably
at
should
it.
have hired Charles Herkus
David.
to run this
Okay,
project.
well, it's okay. Well,
You've read a lot of realty and you should.
yeah, maybe I'll do it myself. Okay, that's fine.
That's
Anyway.
interesting. Charles said from his reference as an engineer. Maybe I may be doing something from my reference as an accountant. That was my major. And
Well, yeah, yeah, well, that's possible.
Well, we are trying to make dollars and cents out of this.
Yeah. All right, you guys, let's call it a day. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see some of you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for stretching my thoughts a bit. Thank you.
Congratulations.
You're all going to meet in Nashville?
Yeah, we'll learn some of that.
We're taking
That's
the whole
lovely.
family,
that's so
hiking and
nice.
the smoking.
All that.
Thank
I
you.
thought you were going to go parking, because, they have like a mini version of the parking lot in Nashville.
In Nashville?
Asheville,
Oh, Asheville,
Asheville.
not Nashville.
yeah.
In Nashville, Tennessee, they have like a 3/4
We've been to the one
version.
in Athens.
Years ago, Asheville used to be an